Hey guys, welcome back to Busted Seams. I'm Shar, I'm a professional fashion designer, and today I'm going to take you through some fashion terminology and acronyms. So there's a lot of terms that fashion designers use every day, and they're not so clear to maybe the outside world or those of you that are just getting started in the industry, especially our little three-letter acronyms or abbreviations that we use for a lot of things can be confusing and overwhelming right when you first enter the industry. So I'm going to take you through a list of about 25 terms and acronyms today and break it all down for you. Okay, so this list could have been easily 10 times as long, but I did force myself to shorten it down just a little bit, just to make it a little bit more digestible for you guys. So we're going to go through about 25 today, and the first one is a really important one, PLM System. So PLM stands for Product Lifecycle Management, and that's not just, solely for the fashion design world. Product lifecycle management is something that is pretty common to any sort of manufacturing part of the industry. But for us, PLM systems could be a Gerber-based program like WebPDM or the newer version, Unique PLM. There's also Flex PLM. There's a ton out there. But having an actual system to keep all of the materials and the tech pack images and the specs and everything in just makes it a lot easier than trying to, corral all of those things in just Excel and PDFs. So a PLM system will allow you to really work a little bit smarter, and as you scale up, it makes it more possible to have other people working in the system, have your vendors able to have visibility to things. So PLM system, in a nutshell, very important. Okay, next up, FDS. So an FDS could be called any number of things depending on the company. We use the term as fabric data sheet or fabric detail sheet. So as a designer, when you meet with the mill, you select a fabric, you ask for a fabric data sheet. So it'll tell you the fiber content, any technologies or chemical finishes that are applied, like chemical wicking or antimicrobial, that kind of thing. It also will tell you the really nitty-gritty details like weight, construction count, dye stuff, yarn size, all of that. And you may, if you work at a place that incorporates all that information for testing into their fabric data sheet, you may have a section for testing as well. So testing happens at third-party facilities usually, and you'll get a test report, but sometimes it's nice to take all of those test results and put them all in one big sheet so it's just a little bit easier to understand. ERP system. So an ERP system is different from a PLM system in that PLM kind of houses all of the product information, and an ERP is really a little bit more for like writing POs and sort of managing that side of the business. So it just does different things that a PLM system can't do. A tech pack is the next term we'll talk about. So a tech pack is sort of the collection of information that is in your PLM system. So a tech pack usually consists of the technical sketches, any detailed call-outs, specs and measurements, other little details you might need to know that don't really have a home on the images, so like the stitching, some of the finishing techniques, and then the BOM is very important. So there's another one for you. BOM is bill of material. So that literally is a list of every material you need to make that thing. So it's body fabric, it's fusibles, it's embellishments, it's findings, it's trims, it's thread, it's everything, all the way down to the poly bag, plastic staples, anything you need for packing or packaging that thing. It is everything that the factory needs to make that garment. And normally when you first release that to your factory or vendor, they'll go through and make a list of everything they need to order and the colors that they need to order, right? Like, I need this pink zipper to go on this pink thing. I need this blue embroidery thread to embroider on this blue shirt, whatever it is. So COO is the next one, country of origin, or COO as we sort of shorten it sometimes. So that one's pretty self-explanatory. Any piece of apparel you own, you can look at the care content label and you'll see the country of origin. That means where that garment was assembled and made. CVC is another one we use quite a bit, especially in tops and shirtings. So CVC means chief value cotton. Usually it's a cotton poly blend, but it's a cotton something blend. So chief value cotton is important to know. The reason we care about it being majority cotton is that affects the duty rate when you import that thing into the United States. It's really complicated. Duty rates vary by country and by sometimes what type of fiber is in it. Super complicated, but generally you want to know if it's chief value cotton, because that means it's chief value like cellulosic natural fiber, right? And so it falls under a different duty category. So garment wash is pretty much what it sounds like. It is any sort of wash or wet process that you put that garment through at the factory stage after it's been sewn all together. So maybe it's a rigid cotton fabric that just needs to be softened a little bit. Maybe it's a pair of jeans that you want to have that high-low effect with the dye around, you know, the seams. Maybe you just want it to look a little more beat up or distressed, or maybe you just want it to have a softer hand, so you put it through a softener silicone wash. Garment dye is a little bit different. With a garment wash, you've already got a blue fabric, you made a blue pant, you're gonna wash it down to look a little bit lighter blue, right? That's a garment wash. A garment dye is made in basically, it's prepare for dye state, which is like white or very close to white. Could be a natural shade, right? Especially if it's cotton. Could be bleached and scoured so it's really, really white. But basically you sew up the entire garment, and sometimes even with the thread, white or very, very light in color. Sew it completely, all done, and then you dye the entire garment. That's how you get some things like, if you look around seams, there's a lot of distressed t-shirts that are garment dyed. If you look and kind of see how the dye didn't quite take in some of those seams where the fabric comes together, you can even kind of pull it apart and see like a little naked area where the dye didn't fully permeate. That usually is a pretty good indicator that it's been garment dyed. It's just a different way of getting a shade. You get a lot more sort of high-low effect in the dye. It takes more dye in some places than other. You get it kind of differently around the seams and around the seam allowance. So it's kind of a different, cool, casual look. DTM, we use this constantly. So it stands for dye to match. For example, if you call out your thread that you want to use, I want to use this size of thread, but I don't want to tell you this is a blue pant and then have to go and find in my thread color book a blue that matches. I can just tell the factory DTM, and that means either dye the thing to exactly match my body fabric, or it means go through the color book yourself and find that closest shade to matching that. Basically, DTM means I don't want it to stand out. I want it to look like it's the same color. Tex is another one that comes up a lot. Tex is one of a few different methods of measuring thread size. We use Tex commonly. We're in the United States. It's just kind of what our company uses. But Tex could be anywhere from Tex 10, which is very, very fine, to a Tex 40, which is a little more chunky. You'd use it on like a decent weight chino, all the way up to like really crazy Tex 120 for heavy top stitching, Tex 300 for sort of inside buttonholes to give it a little bit more oomph, a little bit more durability. So Tex is just a way of measuring thread size. Line is another method of measurement. So line is something you use for buttons and sometimes rivets, anything that's kind of like a little round shank or button. So line is just a little bit more precise than millimeters, though sometimes you do see factories work with millimeters instead of line. Line is a pretty good industry standard though, and if you've met with any trim vendor, they'll probably give you a little measurement tool that's just a little slider that has line on one side and millimeters and centimeters on the other side. So it's easy for you to kind of have that equivalency. Okay, ounces or OSY. So there's a couple different ways of measuring fabric weight. OSY stands for ounce per square yard, which is literally like how much does one perfect square yard of a fabric weigh in ounces. So for example, you may hear 10 ounce or 12 ounce denim. That is what 1 square yard of that fabric weighs in ounces. The other version of measuring is GSM. So this is a lot more common in like knits and tops. GSM is grams per square meter, so you can kind of see like imperial versus metric. There are a lot of conversion tools out there because sometimes a mill just uses GSM and you need that quick reference to what you know, like maybe you work with ounce per square yard or ounces more often, so you know what a 5.5 ounce should feel like or a 7 ounce should feel like. You get the information in GSM, just find a quick online converter, convert it over, and you're in business. So Handfeel or hand is another thing we talk about quite a bit, and it is one of the things that's a little bit more subjective. So I may feel something and think A feels a little softer than B, but the next person may think that they feel really similar. The next person may think that one's a little too drapey or the other one's a little too slick feeling or wet feeling. So hand or hand feel is what we use to describe just how something feels to the touch. But we have words that we lean on as a little bit more standardized ways to talk about things. So a wet hand is more like a slick hand. A dry hand is usually a little bit of a rougher hand, like a wool has a drier hand than maybe like a cotton does. A warm hand would be something that's brushed, or a fleece, that's a very warm hand. It's really subjective because hand and hand feel just refer to what that fabric or material actually feels like to the touch. Grain, if you've done any amount of sewing, you probably know what a grain line is. So grain just refers to which direction you're cutting the fabric. Grain is essentially, on grain would be parallel to the selvage. So if you've ever bought fabric, you'll know that you open it up, and it has these sort of built-in finished edges on either side. Sometimes it looks a little frayed on the end, or it looks a little melted, or there's little pinholes in it. Those are the selvage. That is the finished edge so that when the fabric is done weaving or done knitting or whatever, it has that finished edge so it doesn't just unravel. So on grain is parallel to the selvage. It's also along the warp. That's another term we'll get to today. And cross grain would be across perpendicular to the selvage. Bias is, of course, 45-degree angle, though it doesn't always have to be 45. You can, if you're trying to save yield and fit a few more pattern pieces on a marker, you can go from a 45 to like a 30 or a 20, something that gives enough of that drape and fit to the final garment, but it doesn't cost you as much real estate as cutting it on a perfect 45-degree angle. So that's what grain line means. Blind hem. So a blind hem is stitched with one thread. So again, if you've done any amount of sewing on a machine, you know a thread comes in the top and a bobbin thread is in the bottom, and they stitch together and sort of interlock around the fabric as they punch through, right? So you have a thread on top and a thread on bottom. Blind hem is a little bit different. The machine has actually always freaked me out a little bit because it's got one needle and it's curved and there's one thread and it kind of goes like, and it's a little scary when it's actually moving because like that curved needle just looks so violent. But basically it's kind of whipping that stitch around like that, and it takes just that curved needle just takes the tiniest bite out of that fabric so that when you flip it over to the outside, it's almost invisible, the hem. So you use it a lot on like the hem of dress pants, the hem of skirts. If you can see, it's turned up and you can see the edge of the hem on the inside of the garment, but you can't see the stitching on the outside, or all you see is that very tiny little bite taken out every so often. That's a blind hem. Don't pull on that thread because blind hems are notoriously just willing to fall out. Like once they start falling out, it's just the whole thing's gonna fall out. So they're a little bit delicate, but you can get a really nice clean hem without a heavy stitch line on the outside. So that's what a blind hem is. Okay, clean finish. This is a term to make sure that everything seam allowance wise kind of ends up on the inside, tucked away, clean. So if you think about a dress that has a lining, you have your body fabric, then you have your lining fabric underneath, And when they come together, you don't want any of those edges of that fabric sticking out. You want them to all be clean finished on the inside. So everything's kind of locked away, no raw edges visible. So that's typically what clean finish means. Piping. So I'm going to talk about piping and binding at the same time, because piping is really an edge that it's like usually a round or a flat little pipe looking thing, little edge that you put in on the edge of a seam somewhere. So if you think about a dress that has like this tiny little stripe all the way down the princess seam, that could be a piping. So if you have a black dress, little white, teeny tiny little stripe, and it looks like a separate piece of fabric that's kind of sticking out of the seam, that's a piping. It could be round with a little bit of a round cord in it, or it could just be a little flat piece of fabric, but it gets stitched into the seam, and it's just used as kind of a contrast or just a different kind of detail. You can even do it with the exact same color fabric just to give it a little bit more dimensionality to those seams. So binding, on the other hand, whereas piping is just something that's kind of sticking out of the seam, so here's your seam, here's a little piping sticking out. Binding is really meant to wrap around something. So a binding would be, here's the edge of your raw fabric, binding is going to be kind of all wrapped around to really just finish it off. Construction count. So construction count you hear about a lot in woven shirtings. Construction count is usually a number times a number. So the first number is however many threads are going one direction, the second number is how many threads are going the other direction. So those combined give you the construction count. It is really important in shirtings, for example, because it tells you how many yarns are being used to weave that, and it tells you a little bit about how dense and durable or how lightweight and maybe a little bit flimsier it is. So construction count is pretty important to look at, but it's usually a number times a number. So that's your construction count. It's yarns by yarns. Okay, stretch and recovery. Very important. If you've ever worn a pair of jeans that has stretch in it, that by the end of the day looks like it's 2 sizes too big or is bagging out in the knees, that's because that garment has stretch, but it does not recover. Recovery is what happens when the stretchy fabric goes back to where it started. And sometimes that doesn't happen, especially on denim, until you wash it. Fabrics that have a lot of spandex or elastane, typically they should stretch out and pretty much go back to normal. Maybe not 100% back to normal, but pretty close, right? Like maybe they stretch out and then they're like a little bit bigger, but they did a pretty good job like coming back. So leggings are a good example of they're gonna stretch and they're gonna recover. Okay, ease or ease over body. Ease is the amount of space that there is between you and the garment. So if your chest measures 34 inches, you do not want a 34-inch garment. It is going to be skin tight, and that's not always what you want. Maybe it is, but it's not always what you want. So my shirt, for example, so you can see it's not skin tight. This ease over body, if I pinched all of the extra out, I've probably got maybe 6 inches ease over body, and I like that because this is a boxy outfit. It's not skin tight to my body. So ease over body is just basically the air between you and the garment, and that is part of the design process. Okay, last up for today, we're going to talk about warp and weft. Sort of alluded to them earlier, but warp, again, if you're looking at your fabric, you have those selvage edges, so those little finished edges that come on the roll of fabric. Warp yarns go this way, weft yarns go this way. So that's warp and weft. Okay, that's it for today. We did about 25 terms and acronyms. Hopefully this was a little bit of an eye-opener for some of you, whether you're in the industry or not, or you're just curious about it. We'll probably do a round 2 of this just because my list was twice as long and we only got through half of it today. There's so many terms to go through. So yeah, if there's any terms you've heard or you have a question about something, please drop them in the comments below. I would love to answer your questions and sort of define some of these terms for you in a future video. And as always, please like and subscribe if it is in your heart of hearts, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys.